You probably thinking that Night City is just atmosphere, like neon, rain, cool cars, skyline built to look good while you do your jobs, but look at it like a city planner for 10 minutes, and the illusion cracks. The city stops being set dressing and starts behaving like an antagonist. Night City is engineered, every district has a function, some are designed to concentrate power, some to sell, and some exist to absorb damage so the rest can keep shining. So that's what we're doing. Not reviewing Cyberpunk, but we're walking through Night City like a case study, district by district, asking the same three questions every time. Who owns this space, who actually benefits from it, and who gets treated as disposable when the systems needs to stay functional. Once you see the pattern here, the city stops feeling fictional. Alright, I want to slow this down for a second and just look at the city the way game wants you to see it at first. Neon everywhere, rain on chrome, billboards stacked on the top of billboards. It's loud, it's colorful, it's constantly moving, and it's very good at keeping your attention. That's not accidental. Night City's first trick is visual. It teaches you how to feel before it teaches you how to think. When everything looks cool, everything feels justified. You stop asking why a place exists and start accepting that it simply does. The game even tells you how to read it, quietly. Different aesthetics eras layered on top of each other's, anthropism with exposed wiring and decay, this thing just screaming excess and consumption, new militarism locking everything into sharp angles and controlled lighting, neo thing polishing it all back up so it feels aspirational again. These aren't just styles, but I think they're just moods with instructions. They tell you when to feel small, when to feel impressed, when to feel like you should want more. Architecture becomes the language of the city, and the sentence it keeps repeating is ownership and dominance wrapped in a lifestyle branding. You can feel it most clearly when you drift toward the city center. From far away, it's just a skyline, clean, symmetrical, almost serene, the kind of image that would sell investors on a brochure. As you get closer, the scale shifts. Buildings stop welcoming you and start looming. Streets widen, not for people, but for visibility and control. Lighting becomes deliberate, bright where it needs to be seen, dim where it doesn't. Guard stands where you expect benches. Barriers replace corners you could linger on. The city tightens its posture. City center isn't downtown in the way most people mean it. It's a showroom, it exists to signal stability, power. Everything here communicates that the system works as long as you're on the right side of it. Security isn't about safety in general sense like we knew. It's more about the asset protection, You feel it in how calm everything is, how frictionless it seems. That calm is expensive and it's not meant for everyone. And that logic doesn't stop at the skyline. It bleeds into the space that look public. Plazas, walkways, little pockets that feel like places you're allowed to exist. But try standing still for too long. Try not buying anything. Try being visibly out of place. The rules reveal themselves fast. Cameras, hostile designs, private guards, cleanliness that feels created rather than cared for. The space looks very open, but it just behaves like a store. You're welcome as long as you're performing the right role for the city. Once you start noticing that, it's hard to unsee, The city isn't designed around citizens. It's designed for circulation. Movement of money, movement of labor, movement of attention. People are expected to pass through, consume, work, and disappear. Anything that interrupts that flow gets managed or removed. That becomes obvious when you head into Watson's. On paper, Watson used to be everything. Clubs, corporate office, high-end medical facilities. It was plugged into the system itself. Then the money left, and when investment pulls out, it doesn't take the responsibility with it. Service thin out, maintenance become patchwork, business shutter, then get replaced with whatever can survive the margins. The neighborhood gets labeled bad area, dangerous, and of course problematic. You can walk it and read the history of the walls. Closed storefronts next to pop-up vendors, wiring layered over older wiring because nobody's coming back to do it properly, repairs that are good enough, just good enough to keep things running, not good enough to last. This is managed decline, The city hasn't collapsed yet. It's just decided this area isn't worth fixing beyond minimum function. Once that decision is made, everything else follows. Policing shifts from protection to containment, stigma invites heavier surveillance, gaps in service get filled informally, not because people are evil, but because needs don't disappear when institutions do. Watson isn't chaos, but it's more like abandonment wearing a reputation. Then you look at Santo Domingo, and the pattern sharpens. This is where the city makes itself run. Power plants, heavy industry, infrastructure you never see in marketing shots. It's loud, polluted, and essential. The air looks heavier here, it looks just heavy. The city's metabolism is exposed, value gets produced elsewhere, but the cost settles here. Waste, emissions, risk. Zoning turns certain districts into sacrifice space so others can remain pristine. Put city center and Santo Domingo side by side and the relationship is obvious. One glows, one absorbs, one sells future, and the other just pays for it. This isn't an accident of geography itself, but I think it's more like how they are planning with priorities. And then there's Pacifica, which might be the clearest example of all. Pacifica was supposed to be a paradise. Luxury, tourism, the promised district, developers poured in, visions got sold, construction started, then the numbers stopped working. Investors pulled out, the dream ended with mid-sentence. What's left is a skeleton, half-built towers, empty malls, space designed for wealth that never arrived in the first place, now occupied by people who had nowhere else to go. Pacifica shows you something uncomfortable. Private development can live, residents cannot. When the spreadsheet says no, responsibility evaporates. The city doesn't swoop in to finish the job, but it just adjusts the expectation and let the place to rot into a new normal. Contrast with that, we have Westbrook. Clean streets, carefully managed chaos, the place where fun is supposed to happen. It sells lifestyle more than housing. You're not just renting space here, but I think you're more like buying proximity to a feeling of something. If you cannot afford it outright, credit fills the gap. Loans, debt, pretending, belonging becomes something you finance months a month. Physically, it's subtle, better lighting, softer edge, private security that blends into the background, everything signals safety without saying it out loud, and just a few blocks away, the illustration phrase, wealth doesn't spread evenly, it just clusters. And when it clusters, everything around it rearranged to protect it. That's where inequality stops being an abstract thing on Cyberpunk, especially on this night city. It's not just about the income that we're talking here, but it's about access, who gets fast response, who gets ignored, who gets protected. Healthcare is the cleanest example. Trauma team doesn't exist to save everyone, but it just exists to extract high-value clients from danger. Armored response, instant attention. If you're covered, you're worth saving quickly. If you're not, then you just wait or you don't at all. The same logic applies to justice. Policing follows value. Corporate property triggers urgency. Petty harm in poor districts, it just becomes some background noise. Once security is treated as market, the city starts behaving like portfolio manager. Risk is tolerated where it's cheap and eliminated where it's expensive. To keep all of this running without constant revolt, the city offers anesthesia, brain dance, combat sports, endless stimulation, not because entertainment caused the problem itself, but it's more because it makes living inside it bearable. Escape is easier to sell than stability. When housing is broken and work is precarious, distraction becomes the infrastructure itself. And when formal governance pulls back far enough, something else fills the space. Again, gangs are an origin of Night City's problem. They're the byproduct. They provide order while institutions withdrew. Protection, markets, identity. It's what happens when a city outsources everything and then acts surprised when someone else takes the contract. At some point, this stops feeling fictional, business improvement districts, privatized public space, security zones that feel safe but selective, smart city projects run by corporations with more control than accountability. None of this is sci-fi, by the way. These are real mechanisms. Just turn up to a level where you cannot ignore them. Night City works as a warning because it exaggerates patterns that already exist. Fortress cores don't create safe cities, they just create safe assets. Consumption districts sell belonging and monetize insecurity, and extraction zone absorbs damage so other places can shine. Abandoned project reveal who's allowed to exit and who is not. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Night City doesn't collapse, but it just functions exactly as designed, and that's what makes it unsettling. The colors are louder, the stakes are sharper, everything's turned up, but the logic underneath it isn't new, and it's not fictional. It just feels familiar. It's just easier to see when it's wrapped in neon and rain instead of zoning documents and press release. That's the part I keep coming back to. It responds to incentives, it protects what's valuable, neglects what it's not, and calls the outcome how things work. Night City just stops pretending that's accidental. So the next time you walk through a real neighborhood that suddenly feels cleaner, safer, better branded, pause for a second and ask the same question. Who control this place? Who control this space? Who gets access to it? And who quietly disappears so it can keep functioning?